title is not mine, but whoever made it up thought, well, per many, 2 from 3 is gonna. 3 of my favorite topics: the world, anthropology, and crisis, capitalist or otherwise. What I want to talk about is, and it may seem rather cynical and parochial to do so in a context where the world is sort of heading over the precipice and many people are losing a lot. What I want to focus on is the opportunity that this crisis represents to anthropology, which I admit is a rather selective take on what's happening. But I do feel that we do have an opportunity, and I wanted to talk about it with you. And I think what it involves is asking what anthropology has become in the last 3 decades or so, since the 80s, and which one could associate, well, which we more or less describe as the period of neoliberalism. And if we are going through a break in economic history, it's also a break in the history of ideas, which is quite obvious in that for a number of decades a certain vision of free market economics has acquired a quite unprecedented hegemony in the affairs of world society, and that hegemony has been rudely shattered quite quickly, not least by the capitalist class itself, which moved very quickly to embrace the nationalization of banking and of their lost wealth and so on, probably faster than their critics on the left wing were able to adjust. So, and what I think it raises is a question which has been lurking for some time, and which certainly people in this department, Steve Nugent in particular, but others too, have been, what we've been concerned with for some time is the rupture that occurred between history and ethnography in the formation of modern anthropology. It was a rupture that was temporarily mended in the crisis of the end of colonial empire and its aftermath, but has become quite stark in recent decades. And it seems to me that if we are going to talk about our subject and the possibilities that are open to anthropologists at this time and in the future, then it does more or less require us to take a historical view of the discipline and to place it within a larger global history, which is what I want to talk about today. And so my premise is that if we're going to relocate, as it were, then we have to rethink the relationship between ethnography, history, and philosophy. And if for 3 decades it was a common assumption that we were living through a period of irreversible globalization, the formation of an ever closer integrated world society, the prospects for the world that are opening up now point quite strikingly in other possible directions. So we have to think again also about the global context for our enterprise. Now there are several ways of getting into this, and one of them is to look at what anthropology typically has been since its inception in the 18th century as a way of thinking introduced by some Enlightenment or liberal philosophers, most notably Jean-Jacques Rousseau, especially in my view in his treatise on the origins of inequality, and Immanuel Kant, who at the end of the 18th century, produced the first systematic treatise on anthropology as a potential academic discipline. And the framework for this invention of modern anthropology, it seems to me, is one that we are forced to revisit. I mean, what the point of thinking in anthropological terms was that these philosophers hoped to institute democratic societies in some revolutionary displacement of what we might call the old regime, a system of class rule which was extremely unequal, call it unequal society, if you like. And the premise of this inquiry was that if we are going to put politics into the hands of the people in general, that is a democracy, then we need to know on what basis we could do that. What is it that all people share? Since the societies that they encountered essentially gave power to very few people whose right to exercise that power was understood historically as a rather contingent act of conquest or whatever. And the liberal philosophers felt they had to found or at least consider constructing a political system on the basis of what everybody shares, what we have in common, and they called that human nature. Human nature was that thing that all people share, regardless. And I don't want to go into this in any great length. It's something that I've taught and talked about. Some of you will have heard it many times before. But I think it is important to remember that the anthropological project was born as part of the political program of instituting a democratic society on the basis of an extremely unequal and arbitrary one. And one of the reasons for bringing this up, it seems to me, is that the period that we have just gone through, especially the period since the millennium, has seen a reversion to, in some respects, a society which shares many of the features of the pre-Enlightenment society, the pre-industrial society of the 18th century, the old regime. That is to say, a society in which power is exercised arbitrarily by the king and by his corporate associates. Torture is considered to be normal. Any notion of international justice as a framework for invading countries is abandoned. Power is essentially unaccountable. And so one of my ways of coming to terms with what it is that we have just experienced, that was sometimes called neoconservatism, sometimes called neoliberalism, is that what we witnessed was in some sense a revival of the old regime on a massive scale, to the extent that George Bush and Halliburton could easily double for George II, George III, and the East India Company in the context of the First American Revolution. So if anthropology was launched in that way, what it became in the 19th century was very different. It was no longer a revolutionary project. It wasn't about discovering the means of instituting a fairer or more equal world society, but it was driven by the experience of global conquest by Western imperial powers. In other words, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, Westerners took over the rest of the world with amazing speed and ease in the course of the 19th century. I mean, they did so by developing transport and military and other technologies which gave them so much superior force that by 1900, 80% of the land surface on the planet was controlled by people of European descent.